Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you to everyone joining us, whether you're watching this live or whether you're on demand. I think this is our first webinar of 2026. I'm Rob Crickenden, CTO at Cisilion. We are a London-based IT services and solutions business that, amongst many other things, we help organizations design, deploy, and operate secure cloud and AI-ready infrastructure. We work with organizations across almost every sector, from construction and new build through to global insurance and legal firms, local government, and many charitable organizations to really ensure that network infrastructure projects deliver real business outcomes. I'm joined today, and thank you, Dennis, for joining us, a veteran. I don't know if I'm allowed to call you that.
You aged me well.
I know, exactly. A well-aged veteran networking security practitioner. But Dennis runs our networking and security pre-sales team here at Cisilion. So he's really the one that's going to be telling you all the kind of important technical facts today, with me cheering him on. But we're going to be talking today really about this generational shift in technology and the vital role that secure networking has in supporting the evolving way that we work, where we work, and of course this continuing digital and AI transformation that is really impacting every single part of the way in which we live our lives and we do things. So we're going to aim to cover, in short, three things really today. So we're going to step back a little bit and look at the architectural shifts and the AI era demands that we're seeing, why we need to think beyond just refresh and hardware, but actually how we're really reimagining the role of the network through this transformation. Second, we're going to dig into really some of the operational and security implications of what an AI-ready network really means, from this world of always-on agents, machine speed interactions that we all expect now, and really whether you're building and training your own local language models, or whether you're consuming AI with your own grounded data through ChatGPT or Copilot, those kind of things. And then thirdly, we're going to walk through really some practical next steps, some guidance, some advice, some of the things that we're seeing that really enables you to think about what this next generational shift means for your secure networking environment. So that's enough of my kind of preamble. Dennis, welcome. Thank you for joining this with me today. I guess my first question to you really is, when we look back at the past platform shifts that we've seen, so cloud or internet, cloud, mobile, etc. Why is this different? Right? Why is this different, or why is this the same as kind of what we've seen in the past?
Thank you, Rob. You're absolutely right. I think we are all living in the interesting time of technology, which can change the world. At the same time, we all could argue that to a certain extent, it may be a little bit overhyped in the short term, but it will transform how we operate one way or another. It will be much more impactful in the middle, kind of a longer term time frame, without a doubt. And that's more important to bear in mind during all our conversations, that even though we are trying to consider something which is very tangible and needs to be acted in kind of nearest future, we are still considering what is coming, and we cannot kind of predict explicitly what happens. We are working in a little bit in the dark, and we're guessing a little bit. But what you mentioned, it's interesting historically to see how the company strategies are changing and how they are influenced by different factors. We know the history of IT and moving from mainframes to PCs and going back to centralized computing, data centers, and moving to clouds. And all of that made a significant impact on how organizations operate and how their underlying infrastructure in terms of security and networking are built and architected. And we saw very strong external factors which are affecting companies' strategies, like COVID. Nobody expected that within one flick of a finger, everyone starts working from home, and we need to adjust our infrastructure in order to accommodate and being effective and performing at the level we expected in order to ensure that we're kind of surviving and organizations are surviving. and that's external factors, but there are a lot of internal factors as well, which are driving these kind of adoptions and changes. And from the perspective of recent shifts and introduction of AI, even though AI as such, machine learning existed for many, many years, it has never been get to the level when the ability to be that helpful to users particularly becomes so visible, even though I would argue at this point of time, many organizations are probably seeing that individuals can benefit from leveraging certain tooling. Organizations are still trying to understand where the return on investment is on that, to be fair. But that's a different conversation, to be honest. We are trying to look into infrastructure and how infrastructure changes and how the strategy for infrastructure changes. And it's mostly driven by the fact that, yes, our working patterns are shifting. We are seeing more and more introduction of the agentic AI. We definitely see leveraging of generative AI models for different operational part of the businesses. And we see introduction of AI capabilities within applications which are our workforces are using day in, day out anyways. And all of that creates different requirements and prerequisites to entire NetSec solution or NetSec architecture within organization.
And Dennis, I think when I think you touched on some really important points there, which I want to sort of double back on a little bit, if you don't mind, because when we think about this, when we think about COVID, right? You touched on that earlier on about how it shifted everything. Right, it wasn't just about the personal impact and the health impacts, and obviously those things were massive. But when we think about the way it changed work almost overnight for many people, we had organisations that never allowed anyone to work from home, that suddenly had to enable people to work from home. So when we think about the way that networking and security and governance and all of those kind of things used to work in that organization, all of that stuff had to change almost overnight, right? And of course that meant organizations had to do things that they wouldn't normally do. That meant change management went out the window because we just had to keep the world and keep our people working. And of course what I think's happened is we've had that, right, which has been an ongoing cycle, but it introduced this fundamental shift of the way most organizations are working. And we see this, there's some organizations that are back into the office. We have some that are still fully remote, and we have many that are in this kind of hybrid bubble, which I think is probably where most are here to stay. But then we had at the end of that, we then had, beginning of 2023, we had, as you say, relatively new from a user interaction perspective, this big drive towards generative AI, right? Which again is another significant technology shift, right? Combine that with this accelerated move to cloud that we had pre-COVID, but obviously got accelerated through organizations deploying WebEx and Teams and Zoom and whatever it was, moving out of data centers so they had more cloud connectivity, which was better for people working at home, and all these kind of things that happened. We now find ourselves in a position 5 years later, right, maybe 6 years later, where the role of the network and the role of the way in which we connect and access these applications is very different to kind of what we had probably the last time many organizations did a refresh. And that's only going to continue, as you say, as we start looking at the role of agents and, depending on where that organization is on their transformation, it's coming, right? This wave is coming. It might come at different speeds for different organizations, but it's coming. And that's going to change a lot of things, isn't it? And we need to really therefore think about what was the role of the network and what is the role of the network now?
I completely agree with you. And that's interesting observation because, as you rightly said, we've all been privy kind of and seeing how the transformation happens within the generative AI and using the ultimately chats or other kind of modalities of the modern LLMs helps workers or people to do whatever they need to do. But we are still at the very beginning of the agentic AI, and that's what we're seeing more driving factor of the change, because bringing agents into operations not completely, but significantly can change the demand to the infrastructure and how infrastructure operates. We start talking about autonomous systems and which will operate 24/7, and they will never sleep. They would need to operate at higher probably bursty data traffic and capacity, because they can operate at the machine speed, not in the human speed. We will see more interaction with external systems using MCPs, servers, and systems, which allows to create the kind of workflow of the agents, which will hand over the activities between themselves without human interaction. It kind of happens on the good side. On the bad side, we are probably all aware of the reports that, for example, Anthropic did in November 2025 in regards to almost fully automated the kind of ability to attempt to create the kind of malicious attack on a certain infrastructure, pretty much orchestrated by through Claude code, where they manage kind of the sites managed to almost orchestrate 80-90% of the operational activities through machine activity through AI, rather than doing this through the human being sitting behind the wheel. But that always, as mentioned, it all drives the new needs from the infrastructure as networking side, because will see and start seeing more demand on the low latency, high throughput infrastructure in order to ensure the data movement, because it's always aligned. The AI is very data driven. You need to have a lot of data moved in and out, as well as the need for provide infrastructure which is very adaptable, very not easy to operate, but easier to operate, while providing more visibility and insight what's happening on the infrastructure itself. And that's where, from my perspective, I see two major kind of directions. One of them is how AI currently affect our decisions, how we build infrastructure. So ultimately, how we're using AI in the operation of the infrastructure and architecting infrastructure, as well as ensuring that the same infrastructure is built for AI capabilities itself. So yeah, but what's your view on the agents and rise of the agents?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I think it's a couple of things, isn't it? I think your point you touched on there around networks being, in short, really adaptive, right? Being more intelligent, more adaptive, aware of what's kind of going on. I think the thing that there's that aspect of using, as you touched on, right? Using AI. So let's think of an organization using Copilot for things, right? And most people that use this technology, as you say, at the moment, we are still, I think, very much in the personal productivity wave of summarize this and write this email and create me a PowerPoint or whatever that might be. I think we've got lots of organizations, and we work with many that are in that next stage of where they are building business agents and things, right? So what does that mean? Well, that means that we have got people using tools and we have agents talking to agents in some cases, right? But we are pulling data from multiple different places at very, very fast speed, to your point. So we're changing the way that data traverses the infrastructure. Firstly, we have a lot of people remote. You can have people working from home. You're still accessing this kind of corporate data from what we call grounding, right? So grounded data. That's changing lots of things. We've also still got, and again, without bleating on about COVID, but we've still got this massive transformational shift happening inside organizations, where we see this a lot in the meeting space, right? Where organizations are totally changing the way that employees work. They are refurbing office spaces. There's a lot more video going in. Every meeting should be a video meeting. You've always generally got somebody remote. So again, we're sharing content. We've got AI taking notes for us, recognizing people, recognizing objects, even being able to read the content of PowerPoint slide that's being shared. This creates massive strain on what the networks in many organizations was originally designed to do. I mean, we had to refresh ours, only 18 months ago. So I think all of these things combined are are already a huge impact, strain, demand. And then to answer your question on, then agentic AI and, this rise of always on agents, this is another level that we're going to see in the next couple of years where we've got, and that could be customer service, that could be sales, that could be marketing, many other roles, where we've got agents that are almost virtual employees, right? I mean, if you look at some of the technology shifts happening, we're talking about giving these agents identities. I mean, I'm not just talking about a name, but, they operate like a person. They need to have a network, an identity, for example, in say Entra ID. They have roles, they have security boundaries, they have access permissions, all of these things. So we could very quickly see an organization that say got 1,000 people, physical human people, to having 1,000 people and maybe 3,000 or 6,000 always on agents that are also consuming network resources. They are conducting searches, they are pulling information together, they are creating information. And that's a massive change to anything we've ever seen before. And hence the point, we need to really think about what needs to happen as that evolves to ensure that we have the infrastructure. And we're not just talking about data centers, we're talking about, campus networking, we're talking about wireless, we're talking about, even the devices and things that we use to actually be able to take us on that journey or allow that journey to happen without suddenly getting to a point where we had with COVID, right? Where suddenly, our VPN was completely squeezed because we used to hairpin all our traffic because nobody ever used to work remotely. So we need to ensure we've got that platform to help drive that stuff forward.
I completely agree, and I think it's a very valid point that, as we also mentioned at the very beginning of this webinar, that we are still at the mode of operandi when we are trying to predict what happens next. And if with COVID, unfortunately, we didn't have a notice. We haven't been given the notice. We just need to go home one day and start working from home or from wherever we are. In current situation, we almost seeing what's coming, and so it gives us a little bit of a little bit of information ahead for us, so we can start planning accordingly. And at our next revision of our infrastructure or our partners and our customers, we can think deeper of what potentially comes and how we need to reflect and how we need to adjust our architecture. And it's not unusual in all these conversations when we are talking to our partners and customers, they're asking what's there for us, because ultimately, it's all good and great. And as I mentioned as well, that I do believe enterprises are still trying to figure out where the return on investment comes from using and leveraging AI, while there's obviously some benefits already for the end users leveraging the generative AIs as such. Nevertheless, when we have this conversation, there are two major kind of areas being usually highlighted. One of them is that the technology strategy is having kind of different driving factors, without a doubt. And they can be natively grouped into two bigger categories. One of them are external, and they could be everything from COVID, as we mentioned, like environmental factors. There could be new technology like AI, which came landed, and you need to adjust to that. Or again, cloud, and we all realize that we need to have significantly bigger internet pipes because we are not going to applications into data center anymore. We actually need to go to the internet first. Or other external factors like compliance, regulations, and governance. That's a big element of it, without a doubt, and many kind of infrastructure elements are refreshed or have been refreshed and or transformed recently or before this time, were driven with compliance, because we all need to be compliant with certain security regulations and so on, and that means that we need to have certain level of support, maintenance, and operational capabilities within our infrastructure. But there are also what AI brings to us. There are other factors which used to be taken into consideration. It is end user experience. And that's what we did before with, let's say, again, cloud first strategies. We realized that internet pipes becomes more important. And not just internet pipes, we need to start to understand and have better visibility of what's happening on the internet. Internet is for everybody, but we need to know what's happening because we can't control it. We still need to have visibility of what's happening there. We also obviously aware that with the proliferation of AI, it's not just AI which organization decides to use which comes, but actually many applications we are already using in operations for infrastructure or in just our normal workers. They start embedding the AI agents and the AI capabilities within the applications, whether we want it or not. And that's given for different reasons. And if we talk about infrastructure, it's predominantly to focus to improve operational efficiency, to simplify operations, to ensure that troubleshooting happens faster, and all this mean time to resolution is reduced to ensure that, again, our infrastructure is experiencing fewer outages, it gets faster resolved, and sometimes leads to leaner IT operations. I'm not arguing that with the bringing AI to any tooling, we need to remove the people. People are still extremely vital there and should be there, but it allows them to be maybe not to bear it into day in, day out, the business as usual operations, and actually focusing more on what's coming and be more strategically looking forward rather than just being kind of everyday's operations. And that's what I think very important to remember for businesses, that when the next round of architecture review comes, and I'm sure that for many organizations nowadays, as it was some years before on the cloud strategy, AI strategy becomes very important, and there are considerations of that. And what is important from my point of view is not to forget that when the AI strategy is developed, it still needs to be very well coupled with the infrastructure and NetSec infrastructure as well, not just compute and NVIDIA chips in a data center, but what we're doing on the networking in order to ensure that this traffic propagates well, and on security in order to control what we share and how and where. That's extremely paramount and needs to be done at a very robust manner and put into the overall strategy for the organizations.
Yeah, you again some good discussion points there, and I think you touched on a really interesting one about visibility of what's happening, right? And when we think about the role the network plays, right, and it's the role of the network is as important as the role of the applications and the laptops and the other things that everyone uses, right? Without the network, you've got nothing, right? And I think that those points you touched on are really important around the role that AI plays in the next generation of networking, right? In that we are talking about how do we make operational efficiency better. We're talking about understanding and having, adaptivity to the way in which people are working. And that might change at different shifts. Like, how do you know there's a marketing campaign going on, and therefore you need network traffic to act in a different way, or that people are going to be accessing different bits of content in different ways? And how do you ensure that you've still got the right levels of performance? You've also got, of course, when we've seen loads of outages the last couple of years, we've seen, from the CrowdStrike issue 18 months ago to the Cloudflare outages and Azure outages and AWS outages and anything, right? So we do live in a world where we are, cloud computing is always going to increase. There's loads of that, but we do have outages. And when we think about the role that AI plays in this, where we've got, what happens, what's your backup strategy when AI stops working, right? Where did the traffic go? So I think all of these things are fueling that, and I guess the question, right, is the network of 5 years ago fit for the work function of today? We talked about loads of these variations of things that have happened in the last 5 years, where, from a
Yep.
And Dennis, you and your team are involved a lot, obviously, in these new designs of whether it's new build or organizations going through refresh. Like, what I guess, what do you see? What's your advice to organizations out there that haven't reviewed their network infrastructure, significantly in the last 3-4 years?
Yeah, thank you, Rob. I think it's very kind of valid point, and I think we need to, yeah, well considering that how it affects and whether existing infrastructure is capable of doing that. And to be brutally honest, being networking consultant engineer for many years, we all know that speeds and feeds sometimes are increasing, improving, but it's not always needed. And it one would argue that, oh, I have a network which is absolutely fine and traffic is floating absolutely correctly, and nothing there to improve from feeds and speeds perspective. And that's probably correct. What changes, I would argue, is how we operate that, how much effort we put into operating that, how much visibility we have. And that's where all this kind of concept of AI ops comes in. And if with the previous generation of AI ops, I would argue, the focus was predominantly of collecting more telemetry and do more insight on the infrastructure, what's happening there. And that's absolutely vital. And if your infrastructure is not there yet, and your tooling, which sits on top of infrastructure, networking or security, is not providing you that insight, you are missing out ultimately on vital information to act upon and maybe, again, be more proactive in resolving issues faster. But with embedding also generative AI capabilities in all this tooling in AI ops brings another level of kind of operational efficiency. When you start collating data and telemetry and output of that through a single chatbot through multiple systems, you're not any longer confined to the whatever tool you use for monitoring or whatever tool you use for events logging. You're questioning all the systems at the same time. You're getting a holistic view of what's happening on your infrastructure and how better to operate, how faster to resolve the issues, because that's what matters. If the downtime for infrastructure costs money for the business, that needs to be addressed. And that's exactly the point where we are. If infrastructure doesn't matter for the business, there is no point to having it at all, arguably. You can work from 5G and forget about that, to be fair. So that's one element. So definitely bringing AI ops with the next generation of attention to telemetry, insight, and ability to collate this data from multiple different sources and systems into one single cohesive view of the infrastructure in the moment of time, or prediction what happens, because that's another capabilities of new modern AI ops systems, management and operational systems. They start seeing and looking forward and seeing trends and understanding and analyzing and do the predictive operational maintenance and capabilities, provide capabilities which can be leveraged by the teams. And that's mostly kind of, I would argue, on the networking side. Security is, I generally believe, experiencing significant shift, because there are even bigger challenges on security side. From the perspective, first of all, we're getting new category of the solutions and products, which needs to be secured. And that's where many organizations probably have heard about the term of AI firewalls and so on, and capabilities which needs to be brought in order to help with a completely new kind of group of tasks, which allows to secure these new applications. Are we capable of discovering and understanding what potential AI models are used by agents and so on? Do the detection if any models are vulnerable to certain exploitations and so on. There is all different models already for that exist and needs to be tested against, and so on and so forth. How we protect, how we create guardrails around this information, particularly around generation of kind of malicious prompts, prevent PII information leakage or any data leakage and so on. All of that is brand new problem, to be fair, because we are no longer sharing Excel spreadsheets over emails where we're trying to identify something and so on. We are working in the browser. And if I am allowed to have access to certain information, how I can control what data my user is putting into the browser and what AI agent it is there open at that moment of time. That's where the AI security is spreading and getting more towards kind of two elements of it: defending and protecting and ultimately securing AI as models, and that's what, as I mentioned, firewall, AI firewalls is pretty much. Or we need to also bear in mind that we need to have more attention to protection of the end user and what's happening on the machines where the end users are operating. We're not talking even agents. Agents will be completely different ballpark, but the users. And from that perspective, as in any system, in any decision making, the most important first step is visibility. Do we have visibility what users are using and where they're going to? Do we know what applications they're leveraging? Do we know if these applications have AI capabilities inside? And whether the user can use the chat bot? And I wouldn't argue that you can use AI assistant in Meraki dashboards to create, an essay on, I don't know, Greek methodology. It probably wouldn't be very effective, but nevertheless, it still can't prevent a user to put accidentally vital information into this chatbot, which, arguably organization doesn't know how it's controlled and where the data goes to. If we're talking bigger frontier models or services like Copilot, where one can argue that Microsoft sells you that as a service and it's guardrails and ring fence data you're sharing from your organization within these services. With applications which are just getting additional models and additional AI capabilities built in, it's much more difficult to control and guarantee that data you're putting in is not leaking anywhere outside of your perimeter, outside of your organization. So that's where I think it's kind of important elements of future consideration. First of all is AI ops and how it affects, and that leads very often to next or newer generation of the solutions on the networking itself, being campus or data centers, which is topped up with the platforms which are extracting additional visibility and ability to act on the data collected through that in order to provide vital insight and ability to operate faster and more efficiently, as well as security solutions which do require provide more holistic approach to visibility around end user operations and the operation of the AI models.
I mean, you touched on a couple of really good, again, a really good couple of points there, and I think we've got, we've got the, I don't want to count how many times there's the word AI today, but we've got AI being embedded into the tool sets, right, that we've got to actually make it easier for us to manage our infrastructure, right? So you talk about some of these agentic ops, we know the ability to look for zero-day threats when they happen, and to know what they are, to know what systems are impacted, to be able to recommend to the SecOps team which ones get applied where. So there's some really great benefits of using this technology to make us more secure, to keep us up to date, to streamline our operations, right? And that's not as simple as just, oh, there's this new AI thing in this dashboard, let's use it. I think it's where that fits into the operational business flow of the business, where that fits into change management and everything else that's still got to happen. It's just that you've potentially now got another department, which happens to be, AI-driven departments that are helping you do those things. Your other point is the scary one, I think, for many, in that, most organizations, or a lot of organizations, won't be aware of, they'll have a policy. Most will have a policy. They'll know what is their sanctioned AI tools. You touched on things like Copilot earlier. But I think, the problem goes far beyond that. I think there's using AI that is trusted, that, has things like enterprise data protection, all these things. So they're not going to use your data to train their models. But you've also got the danger of content creation, where people are using lots of different data sources inside the business, from the web, all these other things, and all the challenges that has around actually, verifying that the data is actually correct and who owns it and is the human in control and those things. But also that danger of bringing protected information from different sources and ensuring that data that should be protected still is protected, right? So we're now into the realms of data loss prevention, encryption, labeling, classification, all those kind of things, which again, some organizations do well, some organizations don't. And I think the other one, which is probably good to get your view on this one, is we're seeing these, AI prompt injection attacks, right? So you touched earlier around, different attack vectors. lots of organizations are using agents, particularly if we think about the world, the generational shift of contact centers, right? And actually how we interface from a customer service perspective. You've got, customers, consumers, whatever your business is, talking to chatbots, right? Which are now becoming AI chatbots, right? Or even voice agents that sound and feel like a human and can do things for you. And we've got this new attack vector where we've got these attackers attacking our AI prompts, right? They're looking within the internet traffic, right, for stuff that contains this data that is through chat, and that's a completely different attack vector to what we've seen before. That mixed with the fact that these awful phishing attacks that we often see, right, that hopefully everyone just ignores, are getting better. They're getting more targeted. They're really sophisticated. They're doing machine learning studies of the people they are attacking. These are spear phishing attacks, right? We're not talking, these are targeting at CEOs and FDs and those kind of people, right? And these communications that we're seeing from these new attack vectors are really realistic, and that's before we even think about, these kind of voice hacking attacks and things. I mean, how do we design networks that are ready for that?
Yeah, it's difficult. If I knew that, I probably will be a millionaire. But
you'd be after a pay rise.
Yes, but I think that's exactly the point. We can't find probably very kind of silver bullet for this problem. And as you rightly said, there is a WASP LLM models already exist for some time, and top 10 kind of points there start from one is prompt injection, sensitive information disclosure, and supply chain challenges, I believe, as such, topping up with data and model poisoning and so on. And if we consider that Hugging Face is kind of the place where all the free models are living and data sets, there is in Hugging Face right now, there's more than 2.5 million of models available for users to consume, and how many of them are safe. And when someone decides to make a decision on development, yes, I appreciate you can say, right, I will use Llama because I trust Meta probably a little bit more and so on, but it's very generic models. There are models which are more tailored already and post-trained for or fine-tuned or aligned to specific tasks. And would you consider that to be more effective? Probably do. But do you know if the model is safe? That's a challenge. The same Hugging Face probably has closer to 800,000 data sets only already, so which you can use for training, which should be labeled and being a vital source for post-training models, for fine-tuning the models. But again, how can we trust that? And that's where the new tooling developed by certain organizations is very paramount for being considered as a new frontier for the defense, and that's what this AI defense. I'm not paraphrasing our main vendor product, to be fair, but AI defense has almost becomes a terminology by itself. We are trying to do what we can because, responding to attack which is happening at the machine speed is potentially only possible with the defense with the machine speed, and we only can do what we can. And the important elements obviously is, as I mentioned, for me, is ensure that we have as much visibility as we can at the starting point. We need to be informed what we are using and how we are using. And from that perspective, security products or security solutions we are having in place needs to be reviewed maybe and kind of explored if these product sets you already have, or maybe not, in this case you need to consider for another ones potentially, has the ability to give you enough information to make at least educated decision what's happening. As you rightly said, we very often not as good still at controlling what applications end user can go to and so on, and we sometimes don't even have visibility of it, and that component is very, very paramount. On networking outside of security, I would argue it's more understanding what the data flow is changing. And data flow traffic, which we recently, as I mentioned, getting used to more and more south-north traffic propagation when we are working from wherever we are, because all our services are sitting in the public cloud or maybe sometimes in the data center. With proliferation of agentic AI, there will be more east-to-west traffic because agents start communicating to each other, and agents most likely will be also deployed closer to the end user. So inference will happen at the edge computing, somewhere closer to the operations, being office or being the manufacturing floor, where again speed is important. And for that reason, we also need to address these shifting data transfer patterns within the networking infrastructure and ensuring that what we are building right now, we are not only ultimately limiting factor for us is our pipe to external services. Internal pipes becomes a limiting factor sometimes as well. Not always. Again, I'm not trying to scare everybody and everyone needs to move to 10 gig to desktop or whatever. No, but we need to keep that in mind when the next refresh cycle or modernization cycle comes in, and when the review of the architecture, as I mentioned, happens, we need to bear it in mind and have this kind of on the top of our kind of list for conversation when we are adjusting our future capabilities.
Yeah, because you're right, and it's not, like you say, it's not just about why bigger pipes have 10 gigs of desktop. It's also around that the thing with a lot of this traffic is it's very sensitive to latency, right? You write a prompt in something, you expect a response, yet there's lots and lots of different data being accessed, and I think we will see more of that localized edge AI, as you say, right? Whether that's on chip through devices, right? So these AI PC generations, or whether that's happening, at the edge routers and access points in the future, right? And I mean, we already see this in a lot of the meeting room equipment, where a lot of what the AI inference that would have been done in the cloud is being done locally because it's faster, more reliable, better quality, yep. All those kind of things. So I think and I guess as we kind of get towards the end of this, I think that there's a couple of things I wanted to touch on. So I think firstly, there's that, and there is a bit of a vendor play here as well. I think when we think about network security and the fact that it's really kind of becoming NetSec, as you say, right, and coming together, I think when we think about refresh, we should look at those things. We need to look at what's the security that we need. So you touched on, AI defense products. We think about data loss prevention. We think about, all the other kind of core security controls that we need to have in place. And it's a good time to not just review the network infrastructure, but the security layers as well. It's not to say you need to rip everything out, but we know that most organizations have got so many different security products deployed, sometimes all doing the same thing, sometimes conflicting with each other. That can cause delay, that can cause false positives, or it can let things through. I think there's definitely a point of, all of the leading network providers are joining their security products together and infusing them into the hardware layer. So it is a lot more integrated. It's not to say that you don't need any of those other things, but I think it is a good opportunity when we think about refresh. That's obviously cost, but it's not just about cost. It is about, how do we provide
it's a value
better,
it's what we're trying
value,
to get.
absolutely. And better agility, risk reduction, operational reduction. I think so I think it's how we see these things as a huge advantage, rather than we've got to replace that network infrastructure. I think it's something that generally is done because stuff goes out of support, out of warranty, gets too old. We talked about the change of the office environment. That has a big impact, right? The way in which we work, the way in which we interface with people now. Pre-COVID, video calls weren't something we did all the time. They now are. Pretty much most people, every single meeting will have somebody remote, and that needs to be inclusive. And we're sharing more content, we're summarizing those, all of those things drive. So you're right. This is business value, and I would argue it's as important as the cloud provider you choose, or the data center provider you choose, or the AI product that you choose, right? These things become, and I guess always have been, really strategically important. Before we kind of wrap up, though, of course, there's other things that's happening in the landscape, right? So we've got this big demand, right, for network refresh. I think if you look at the industry stats, if you follow any of the vendors, there is a huge refresh cycle happening right now, with organizations. And amongst that, of course, we've got this this supply chain struggle, right? Which we tend to have with everyone. It's like we had it with COVID. I mean, it was a little bit different because manufacturing plants were closed and things like that. But what's your feeling on this? What are you seeing in reality? Is this a scare factor to put up pricing, or is it something that organizations need to really worry about?
Very interesting, because it does depend on the vendor, to be fair, very often, and how independent vendor is, how robust their supply chain is in terms of what they're using for manufacturing their equipment. Vendors who are more independent from silicon manufacturing in terms of what they consume probably are less affected than those who are using more generic and more common ones, because if your equipment depends on silicon again or chipset, which is manufactured by a certain manufacturer who has in their portfolio manufacturing not just, let's say, switching silicon, but also AI GPUs and GPUs and so on. Nowadays, as you can imagine, they can demand more money for the other type of silicon, and they will be probably prioritizing their manufacturing there. It doesn't mean that it completely starve the other chains and so on, but we do see that different vendors potentially can have different lead time for the equipment. In overall, I wouldn't say that it is as bad as COVID. It's definitely much easier than that, but one needs to still keep in mind that only gives excuse sometimes to manufacturers and vendors to ramp up their prices, which is unfortunate. We all have to kind of to deal with that, because in the end, we certain any value has a value, and when the cost is increasing, it doesn't help. So from supply chain, I would argue it varies, unfortunately, but come to talk to us if you're struggling with certain elements. We're more than happy to have this conversation and understand how we can help you better, how we can proactively plan that, and also inform you on any potential price increases which are coming from different manufacturers, because we are sometimes getting this information a little bit earlier, so we can help you again with the planning perspective.
Totally. And Dennis, firstly, thank you. I think it's been I always love running these when I learn things. So thank you for for your insights.
Thank you.
But I think one of the things I took away from this, actually, which we talked about a couple of times, but I think it's actually really important from some of the guidance that you gave, is obviously when we're thinking about refresh, or if we're thinking about refresh, this is about really thinking about, how is what we're building going to support the business today and tomorrow? And I think your point was about, you need to really start with that visibility. Have you, I'd ask yourselves, have you got the visibility of how the networks, right? How do people, what are they interfacing with? What are they using, right? And you'll probably have a lot of these tools inside the business. So, we touched on things like, cloud application firewalls, but what's being seen? What are people using? What are the AI visibility tools that you've got? If you haven't, there's tools you could buy to do this, right? I'm not going to sell you a load of things today, but there's really great visibility tools that your network provider will probably provide, or we can advise you on, that give you those kind of insights of what's happening, what is performance like, all the way down to the user. Many of these are becoming agent aware as well. What's that inference model looking like? What is the interaction? Where is AI being used, right? Because it's scary sometimes when you look at the data, right? I remember looking at it internally, it's like, wow, how's that? It needs to do something about that. And I think that, explore where agentic ops is going. And I think that was the other thing I found really interesting, is we often think about AI as being the tool that people use, but you're right, to enable AI, it's everywhere. It's going to be in our admin centers, it's going to be in our network operations tools, it's going to be part of our service desk, right, at some point in the future. And it's also a very scary and significant and sophisticated and always on attack vector. We're not now just talking about agents of people doing really smart attacks. We're talking about agents that don't eat or sleep and have got as much power and as much resource and no emotion and no regret and no anything, right? And we have to fight back with the same technologies. And I think these are a couple of the things that you touched on today that really resonated for me. I'd love to know, for everyone listening, kind of what resonated for you. Please do tell us in the comments. But firstly, look, thank you, Dennis, for your practical lens on this. For everybody watching, thank you for marketing, for getting us all here and not being late. And yeah, thank you, everybody, and have a fantastic Wednesday.
There's only one question, Rob. I'm not sure whether we wanted to address or not. Andrew asked, this is just technology progress, same with the cloud, same with the big data. As long as budget holders plan long in advance, it means that you have the right hardware and so on. It is, to some extent it is. I completely agree with you, Andrew. The main challenge is, or difference is, I think, in this case, we used to build for capacity. We used to build for that. Right now, we almost trying to build and operate with AI for AI. That's kind of elements which, as we discussed, the next big shift from my personal perspective is that agentic AI, as I mentioned, but agentic at the moment is still very often used as assisting agent. Yeah. When it gets more agency and becomes authoritative agent and start making decisions without human being interacted, infrastructure which this agent operates on becomes again very not difficult to operate, but needs to be operated with the speed of the same machine kind of operation. And that's where operational center and operational models which are enhanced with AI capabilities becomes very important. So when we do the next cycle, you're absolutely right. We need to plan and we need to budget, but we need to see whether the tooling we are using, technology we are using, are having this stuff enabled and allow you to, as operator of this infrastructure, be more efficient and more effective.
Awesome, thank you, Dennis. Fantastic. We'll hang on for a couple of minutes in case there's any other questions.
I haven't seen anything on the Q&A. Oh, there's something in the chat, isn't it, or not? No. That's it.
I think we're good. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. I'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you.